Week in Hospitality Marketing Live show number 452. It's April. Thank you so much for joining us today. For those of you catching us on our restreaming on Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter, or YouTube, thank you for joining us, including the multiple time zones. Still always impressed by that. And of course, if you're watching us on our TV station, the Hospitality Channel, on your smart TV, Apple TV, Google TV, Amazon TV, Roku TV, all of them. By all means, thank you for watching us live on our TV show or station as well. And if you're listening to us on our live broadcast on our radio station, thank you as well. We're in 209 countries. We translate to 11 languages. We keep the translator busy. I talk too fast. But anyways, thank you so much for joining today. Let's jump into today's topic. I'm tackling kind of because we're coming to that point after the end of the first quarter. Obviously, it just happened. We're going into second quarter. We're getting our first evaluation of this year's numbers compared to our prognostications from last year's budgeting process. And we're realigning what we consider to be applicable goals. We tend to be short-sighted in that sense that we always look at the 30 being the primary, 60 being relevant, and 90 being still stylized. And out of that process, we become more and more reliant upon data. Now, we've had some very interesting discussions on the purpose of data, how to gather data, what to do with data, what's changed in data, how does this relate to marketing? And last week we talked about production, not purpose, which was the flaw associated with marketing, where we're looking at numbers based on an ROI as a single and first only filter to our success ratio as to what we're doing marketing wise successfully. And that can be very myopic, and it can limit our creativity and diversity of looking for new and emerging ways to market ourselves if we only look at the ROI, because ROI is always going to bring us to the low-hanging fruit, and it's not going to find us new markets in which we can quest into. So this week's discussion is relevant to it, but not the same, because we're going to be very data-centric now, where we're going to be talking about our topic today as being objective, not subjective marketing. And the reason why I picked that topic title was because very often marketing is plagued by opinion, albeit informed opinion, gut impression, history of, experiences with, whatever. Let me paint the context in which I'm referring to. A lot of times, for those that do try to do something marketing, they bring it to the altar of criticism. And in the business world, you have sandboxes. People have their areas of influence, their responsibility space. And for that reason, most people first approach their opinion of something in relationship to its direct impact on them, how it affects their job, how it affects what they're responsible for, how it reflects whether people perceive them being successful at the job and what have you. This comes both from the originator of the idea and those that are asked to critique or have a peer level opinion on something that's happening. That sometimes can be the kiss of death for a lot of programs, because if it's threatening to people outside of the person that came up with it, they may be negative towards it because of self-preservation. They don't want to be jeopardized by it. Skipping that aside, they may be skeptical of it for lack of information. They may be contra to it because they didn't come up with it. There's a lot of hurdles that ideas have to come up with. Unfortunately, a lot of the ideas get tainted and painted in that context as to passing that muster, getting past those objections to the point of being able to be adopted. Kind of like a political system, really. You have to give up a lot to get to a position to be able to be responsible for it. So in this marketing process of coming up with ideas and so forth, for those that are adventurous enough to come up with things, they have to go through this gauntlet. So that's already prohibitive. Secondly, a lot of the motivation behind being new with marketing or changing your marketing, if it doesn't follow the ROI conversation we had last week, it gets shut down very quickly, because that's the easiest thing for people to shoot at. Well, where's your money? Where's your profit on that, Lauren? That seems like a pretty ambitious project, a lot of expense and not a lot of revenue from what it looks like, and so forth. It begins to get kicked and shot at perpetually for the ROI filter that everybody first holds up to it. Because, to be rude, ignorance wants ignorance. And if you just simply keep with ROI, then you will never see the chances of other opportunities, because ROI is not the first result. Unless you find a silver bullet, strike it rich, scratch dirt and find gold, your first idea usually isn't the most successful idea. The first idea is a stepping stone to the second next best idea, and the second best idea goes to the third better idea, and the fourth goes to the best idea, perhaps. And there's a progression of expansion and understanding. There's a research. A lot of times you have to hide what you're doing, masked into what other things are successful. You get to bleed some of the ROI down in some campaigns because you have a beta program that's running in it as a nascent program that isn't getting the ROI, but it's also avoiding scrutiny because it's blended with a high ROI campaign, and therefore it's avoiding the "what the hell is this? Why is it not making any money? Why are you still running it?" conversation. Why do I bring all this up? Because data is a solution process to this. What we just discussed as to the hurdles and the problems and the objections and the modality of presenting things is usually a subjective marketing plan. Subjective meaning I feel, this is what I think. It shows kind of like other people are doing it. These are soft purposes. Now, they are political swaying techniques in the sense that you are convincing people to rally behind your concept so that they don't poo-poo on it. But for the most part, it is an arbitrary concept put forth sometimes under the sheer belief that it could be supported by everybody by being vague enough and possibly valuable in some context. As I've often criticized many times, people always look at projects in two categories. Being able to maintain a proximity to it, should it succeed, they can take credit for it, or at least share in the credit, and far enough away from the blast radius that should it explode or implode, that they aren't being held culpable for it. Culpable deniability, basically. So for that reason, a lot of things just stay in the safe zone for marketing. What's producing? ROI. What is our mainstay? Branding. What are we putting forward? Standardization. Tone deaf, non-responsive, lack engagement marketing that we see everywhere. I love my competition to do that. It is so easy to poach business from them because the people, us, consumers, guests, future guests, potential guests, are bored with the lack of creativity, bored with the lack of progressive conversation, bored with the content that's relevant, and bored with the understanding of what it is that you're selling beyond the face value of what fuzzy buzzwords you want to throw up for it. So for that reason, data turns into an objective marketing program, not subjective. Hence the title today, objective, not subjective marketing. What do I mean by objective? Like any good survey question development, you first start with the answer that you want, with the idea of what would I do if I had that answer? And from that, you build a question to construct yourself for guiding the person you're going to ask the question to give you the most relevant, usable answer that you need for the KPI or the goal that you have in mind for using it. Same too with data. Data, you have to objectively look at what is it I want to do? Now, if you're first popping, you make more money. Oh my gosh. Yes, thank you, Captain Obvious. All of us as a business model want to continue to make good revenues. There goes the ROI conversation to a lot of it. The clarity of having a KPI is the granularity of understanding the objective goal. Is it traffic generation? If so, what number is successful versus a number that isn't successful? Where is that line drawn? If it's conversions, thank you, Mr. ROI, then what's a successful growth number and a not successful growth number? What's the pantheon of what that tolerance is? Below this line is intolerable, must be cut off, not being valuable, not producing, not going in the right direction. It's showing marginal interest. Okay. We might consider adapting it, making some multivariate testing, do an A/B test at the very least to see if it's a component of what's not causing it to work. Tolerable, meaning average and normal and mean, meaning it's producing no fire burning here, no revelations, no silver bullets, but productive. Better than we expected. Oh wow, this is doing well. This seems to be a good vein of direction that we're going. And oh my gosh, we found the mother lode, which is we had no anticipation of this happening. Here's where, and taking that same spectrum, the pantheon of successes and failure, is also the idea that timing is also an important variable to put into that process. Is the project sound but poorly timed? Is the project relevant but not targeted? Is it targeted but tone deaf to the recipients? These are qualifiers, and these qualifiers have to be identified. So this is the premise of getting towards the end of actually using data. We're going to back the line up a little bit into the progression of data. Knowing that we have to define KPIs, key performance indicators, we have to come up with objective numbers, objective programs, specifics to what we define as key performance indicators. Not well, it did better than our normal campaigns, or it looks like that people are interested in what we're doing because we're getting some traffic from that. What's some traffic? What are those people? It's so soft. It's like you're just hiding behind ambiguity. Good, clean, convincing programs associated with marketing are objective. Clear goal, clear process, clear measuring. Measuring requires accuracy. So let's go through the 4 steps of what is good data progression. We've had this discussion. As a matter of fact, on show 438, we had this discussion. Excuse me, 439, show 439, where we were talking about the processes of data. And we were in the context of with GA4 having rolled out to its permanency July of last year, and UA being fully retired at that point. We were looking at a whole new data pattern, and we've gone several times around the data wheel as to what data means now and how data is useful and how it's being reported or how it's being identified and how it's being aggregated and so forth. This is a dimension that we have not discussed in full clarity when it comes to objective marketing. The first step with data being useful and able to support your objective goals of creating KPIs and hence objective marketing programs. The first step out of all this is data identification. What do we mean by this? What data are we talking about? It's a fun word, 4 letters, but what data are we talking about? There are several sources of data that are in our ecosystem when it comes to hospitality. We have the PMS system. We have the online booking system, which should be symbiotic and compatible in numbers. The point of truth being, of course, the PMS data, because that is your aggregate of all activities, because that's your transaction hub. But then your online booking engine should be everything that it's doing in relationship to the PMS. So it should be a contributing factor of that. You have your web analytics, which are all the things that are happening online for you. Those should be tied to your online marketing efforts, your Google ad campaigns, your Bing ad campaigns, your social media paid campaigns, all of the traffic associated with all of your organic and social and anything else, and ads and display ads and everything else you're running online should come through your Google Analytics GA4 as a source of data. Then you have your other data. You have your CRM data, your email, your relationships, and your content related to those markets, and they should be relevant in their connection points as to your GA4 data if it's being driven to your website, which most often it is. On your online booking engine, it should be correlated there. Your PMS should be your final authority to it. All of these things should be connected. So data identification is important. What comes out of data identification, unfortunately, is duplicity. So you need to authenticate the sources of data and define which one has the authority over the other for the accuracy of the data that is duplicated in other sources. Take, for instance, your CRM email campaign goes out, it hits your website, but then it also goes to your booking engine, which is your online booking engine, before it gets into your PMS system as a booking. Which of those points are there accurate data for the total transaction or engagement of data that you're getting from them? Without splitting hairs, one of them has to be the point of truth, okay, which is the key element of data identification. What is my point of truth? Point of truth being this is the authority compared to any other source when it comes to the data, okay? Usually, most often, highly recommend PMS. You also have to keep, as I mentioned, the sources identified. Where are we getting this data from, and how is the data that we're collecting gathered? We'll get to the other steps later. And of course, validating the data, confirming that the data that is being gathered is accurate, not duplicated, not inaccurately measured, right labeling, right protocols as to identifications that when you say this is a hotel ID, this is a hotel ID that's used by all the platforms so that it's the same reference to the data, so that one platform isn't reporting towards an ID that the other platforms don't know. They all understand the data. You, more importantly, understand the data that you're getting from all the sources. So step 1 is defining data identification and the point of truth related to it. Step 2, data reporting. Now that we have the data coming in and we've authenticated it, we've validated the sources, and we understand the points of truth and the data that we're getting, we now have to report on it. Reporting means here's all the numbers, here's all the stuff, here we're getting all this data, and how do we put this in a way for us to review it, to look at it? Okay. That requires proper tracking, that we measure what it is that we're looking at for data, creating the metrics associated with it. This is average, this is below average, this is above average, this is this in comparison, this is a spaghetti, this is a pie, this is a bar chart, whatever these things are, the metrics associated with it, which usually comes at this point under the discussions and projects of data reporting as dashboard creations. Okay. Reporting, these things are descriptive data. You're now describing the data that you have identified as a point of truth. The descriptiveness of it is considering the commonalities of all the tracking, considering the sources of all the data that you're gathering, identifying what it is that you're bringing in, and putting it into some semblance of correlation, comparisons, contrasts, reporting, dashboarding. This is the descriptive process of data reporting. So step 1 was data identification. Step 2 was data reporting. Step 3 in the progression of data progression is progression. How many times can we use progression today? Is the data analytics. Now you may say, wait a minute, we just did reporting. Yes, reporting is just that, reports. Here's a report, it's all shiny. And look, green colors, red colors, blue colors, charts, bars, spaghettis. That's a report. Reports are useless unless you have analysis on them. The interpretation of the data, modeling the data, and forecasting with the data. This step 3 is under the classification of predictive data progression. We are taking the data that we have identified and take the data that we've put into an aggregate reporting process of this should be compared to this. This is something that we need to measure compared to that. And now we're looking at what does that mean? The analytics of it. Now, this is where we are for most of us. For those who have done step 1 and step 2, you're in this one. This is where everybody kind of stops. Everybody gets their monthly reports. God knows for everybody that has to create the monthly reports and go through the process of making sure that those same reports for whoever's using them for whatever reason, if they're still being used, we've had that discussion before, still gets the reports at the beginning of the month for the relationship with the EOM or end of the month for the previous month. Well, that's as far as you go. And a lot of people, and I told you about this when we talked with our clients, and we have any new clients, we're talking about the processes and so forth. We ask them the report cycles. What reports is that you get? What reports do you generate? Who regenerates them? And how often, first off, are they duplicated and just relabeled because of different departments that want them? Is the same data available on one report that the other report could be useful for? And you don't have to make 2 reports. And first off, we just decided, is anybody looking at this and who's making this stuff? Who's taking their time to make this stuff? Because if anybody from past experience of being property management, it's a lot of time for the property to continue to send these reports up that everybody wants about what I'm doing to the point that I don't have time to do it. It's the bane of most properties. Like, oh, another report I got to make. Holy geez, who wants this one now? Why can't they just take the report that I already have it in from over here and give it? And that's where that breaks down. So with that, you need to begin to look at the data. And a lot of times when we ask people this, they don't look at all the data. As a matter of fact, they very rarely even look at the reports. They have them in case they're ever asked, or they have them in case a question comes up that they know that the information might be on the report. But for the most part, they don't really use the reports as a process of decision making. A lot of them don't. 90% plus don't. They just look at it to know whether or not they're going to get beaten up in a meeting or praised in a meeting, of whether their number lands right. Just ask anybody, revenue management, operations, marketing, when it comes to star reports and your RevPAR. When you talk to ownership or management. So a lot of times they only see pieces of the data. They look for a number or a thing. Is this a good thing or a bad thing? Or should I, is it something I should be worried about or something that's okay? What we expected, whatever. And the rest of it just gets tossed or put on the shelf in case it's being asked. And yet the people that have to create that report still have to spend all the time they did to put up the numbers that most of the time people don't use. That's where a lot of people get stuck. This level of predictive modeling has to come now. This is where we start talking about new and fun things. Everybody wants AI to solve the world. Like, let me start from a non-solution process and just simply turn over to AI and have them fix everything or magically fix everything from where I'm not doing anything to where everything's being done. AI can't do that. AI is, we often talk about a brilliant child that has to be told step by step what it is you're looking for and what you want from it. If you can't do that, you're not going to get anything useful in a way that you expect. So data analytics is like that. So if you were to look at, this is a place where artificial intelligence and or a step up from what you're doing of just getting a report to look at begins to come at play. And this is the interpretation of the data. This is where you look at your data and say, does this number have any relationship to that number? And if so, is there a value to knowing that relationship? And if so, the value of that knowing that relationship, what would I do with that data? Again, going to the end, which is what would I do with the answer? And going backwards as to whether or not that's worth doing. That interpretive process is new for all of us. New because we now have data that we haven't had historically. I'll give you a very simple case example of it. When you go to a hotel's website and you go to popping into a book now and go to the book engine, you're presented their offer groupings, ARP, AAA, Fly and Go, whatever, family rates, military discounts, whatever it is. Every one of those offers on your booking engine is backloaded with what your revenue manager said the room types would be available for it. So if you didn't have a certain room type available for a certain specialty rate, it would not be loaded for that rate. When people hit that rate to go look for room types or rooms to book, that room type wouldn't be in there. Revenue managers, we point out, tend to be very lazy and we'll put everything in there until we find out who's wanting to buy what, and then we'll yield it, which is always too late and too little. Well, all of that data of what room types were made available when that guest looked at those offers, because your booking engine in the background loads all that up along with the rates that were offered for them. So all that data, hundreds of room types, and I mean hundreds. If you only had 4 offers and you have 4 room types, multiply that out exponentially, you have hundreds of variations cumulatively that are preloaded in the back of that page for the guest to choose from. Because if they click on a specialty offer, they're going to open up the booking capability. Booking capability is going to have the rate availability. Rate availability is based on the inventory that's being offered for that, on and on and on and on. Lots of variations. Well, that data, if you're not accumulating, which is silly, but if you accumulate that data, you can look at the inventory types that are being made available to people. My king suites, my doubles, my studios, my beachfronts versus my sunsets, whatever variations of names that you have. And from that, you can determine if there's a resistance to or a speed of pace that bookings happen from. And this is where I talk about revenue managers being lazy. They often put all inventory types. They go to make a specialty code and peek behind the curtain. So you go in, the revenue manager goes into your booking engine system, Synexus, whatever. And they say, we're going to make a booking code. We're going to label it this. And this is the short, 50 character or 50 word description of it, so forth and so on. Here's the image logo I want to put up for it. Choose from the following, so forth. And what is the rate? Or if they go, what inventories are being made available? And the system will show all the inventories that it's aware of, all your room types, with a select all or variations thereof. They often select all. And then they'll define rates. And if there's a need, if there's a good revenue manager, they'll go over and they'll identify certain rates for certain inventory types. If they're, like a 1-bedroom suite compared to just a king, different pricing. But usually the price model fits pretty much according to the rates, because you usually deal with a single price model for all of them and then a modifier from that single price. So all the rates are loaded for the inventory type, and then you have a modifier for the specialty code as to what discount is being offered against that base rate, your bar rate. And that's usually how it gets built. They don't preclude anything or anything. Well, all that data, point I'm trying to make, all that data is tracked. So I can see, if I want to, what inventory types are being shown but not being booked. Now, of course, the inventory availability being shown is contingent upon the inventory that is available. So as you sell out of inventory type, room types, that inventory type doesn't get displayed as often because it doesn't get available as often. Remember, date selection is the primary consideration. If you have a very busy week and you're already sold out of your king suites, it's not going to show in any of those rate profiles that are being offered for that weekend. If you know this and you go backwards in it, you could create a KPI that says, should I offer king suites in any discount below 15%, 10% off? Meaning, should I offer it for anything that's 20% or anything beyond 10% off? When I say below, I mean greater discounts. My apologies. So you can look at the data and say, it's not worth it. Whenever we do a rate offer that is more than 10% off, exclude King Suites, because we will good sell them. We'll sell them at the better rate, bar rate, without having to offer them into specialty rates. Because if I go in and I want my AARP rate and I go in and I want the King Suite because that's what I got sold on, but it's not available in the AARP, but then I go back and I go look in general and it's available, I have a choice as a consumer to make. Do I just settle for a different inventory type to get my discount, or do I really want that room type and I will forego the discount to get it? That's revenue yield. That's a useful piece of data. That's interpretive data. With that, you can go over and create modeling. Modeling is, if we have this data going backwards in history, then we know what time of year this inventory type sells the most. Maybe it's all the time. Maybe it's just the preferred inventory type. Any revenue manager knows their best preferred inventory type because it sells out first and hardest. Persistently. Sometimes it's self-fueled because they keep offering it in all the rate categories. Sometimes it's just that is the demand. Beach Sunset or Beach View King Suites, can't keep enough of them. Would love to make the whole hotel of them if I could, but I can't. So, those, every revenue manager and every operating person, GM, and everyone knows what the best-selling room types are. And to that point, the best-selling rooms. To that end, if you want to create a modeling that says, hey, what should we do about this? Let's look over the whole past year and see our ebbs and flows as to the demand on this inventory type and how we achieved the selling. So here's your arc of demand where people get exposed to the rate and to the inventory type and they purchase it. And then here's the arc of when we made the inventory available. If you're leaving it on all the time, they're almost symbiotic. But if you begin to moderate the inventory type, you'll start seeing inconsistencies. The demand is higher, the inventory is not available. And this gives you insight as to making revenue decisions. That's called modeling. Forecasting is flipping that forward and saying, knowing historically that at this time, these inventory types at these rates on these offers, they tend to perform at these levels. What can we do with understanding what we should ask for? What is our rate strategy for? Because sadly, rate strategy is like dominoes, or everybody looks at each other like, okay, what are you doing? Oh, well, I'm going to do $5 more than you. It's like the Price is Right. That's what I was thinking of. Price is Right. Poor first person, they pick something, and then the next person is either picking above them or below them at a certain margin. The person after that is picking above or below those two people from a certain margin perspective. That is revenue management I see every day, and it just drives me knuckin' futz. Because all they're doing is seeing what, from a marketing perspective, do they stand out or do they stand in a blend? The real revenue management strategy is placing themselves in comparison to others. How am I placing myself? Am I a mid-tier? Am I upper tier? Am I rate driven? Am I occupancy driven? Am I a market leader? Am I a market follower? These are all subjective revenue management ways of doing things. It'd be better to have data of your own to look at what you think you need to do. And if you know that your inventory type is at a certain demand peak or valley at the time that you're looking at, and you have the rate values of what you can and can't offer historically and your competitors offering historically, so market forbearance on demand to market, then you can come up with, without ghosting any of your competitors, what you feel is a rate that will optimize the demand you're aware of, the rates that are tolerant to the market time that you're looking for. That ability of forecasting, okay, compared to the modeling, compared to interpreting the data, is all the step 3 data analytics called predictive data for KPIs. What, with the data, can I determine I need to do with it to make decisions? Okay, looking at the data, this is telling me I'm getting a lower demand. Now, from a marketing perspective, I've been hounding on revenue managers. Predictive gives you great insight about something else. And I'll say this in a great way. So a lot of times there's that simplicity factor of data. Is our revenue number still good? Is our growth still going up? Little arrow up. Is it green color? Because green means good. And then they get ignored. Like, oh, it's going. Our ROI is still good. Our revenue is still on the positive. Okay, we're good. With predictive modeling, predictive data, predictive forecasting, you can begin to see, say, your paid campaigns. At first, they're producing a certain level. oh, it's amazing. Huge delta variance compared to what they were producing before. And of course, you're going to get positive numbers, positive growth. Everybody's happy. But there's a pace and trend. We've talked about it many times. Pace and trend are so often not talked about in the level of decision making. The pace of things happening and the trend of what they're doing have to be used at this level predictive modeling. You will see that even though it's producing good, it's beginning to slow. Your delta is getting smaller compared to comparisons of the variance of growth is getting smaller and smaller and smaller. And sometimes it may be just the same growth level it was before, which is flatline. Doesn't mean it's not in comparison to previous periods better than it was, but in the comparison of pace and trend, it's leveled out. It's peaked. It's not growing up anymore. It hasn't gone down yet. It's at the same level of production as it was before. And then, of course, there's the downturn when the delta begins to go to the negative. It's still, in comparison to what it was originally initiated against, a positive growth. You still see the green arrow up and the positive number, and everybody thinks the world is great until the world isn't. If you can catch that delta trend, that pace, when it begins to diminish its arc, early enough that either there's a corrective measure you can make or a new implementation that you can add to it, that is the predictive modeling use of the data. That is to see it before it happens, to know I need to begin to adjust my campaign structures, because even though they are continue to be productive, they're slowing down, or at worst, they're declining. They're still in the positive, but they're declining compared to their production from previous time. So I need to start doing something else. What's the next campaign to make them rise? What's the thing we need to do to maybe bolster them? Whatever it is, that's the predictive use of data. Very few, and I say this selfishly, outside of what we do, very few supporting services agencies, internal organization do that. They just don't do that. They don't look at their data well enough to see that. A lot of times when we even talk about it and we show the tools we've created to use to do that, we have this wonderful health and score index that we monitor these things. And we start pointing out to them, it's like, hey, you're all happy, slapping each other on the back that things are going well. They are in comparison to what you're comparing against in the longest of terms, but in the shortest of terms, you're arcing. You're past your prime. You're on the downslide. Your campaigns will slowly continue to degrade until they hit that red color and the arrow doesn't go up anymore. And now all of a sudden you're reactive to solving it when you could have been proactive in preventing it from dipping as low as it did and could have maintained a continued growth or continued positive impact. I know that sounds like a selfish plug, but it just, when you look at that and we do that kind of stuff and we're pointing that out to them, it is some people just, anyways. The final step of our data KPI, objective versus subjective marketing conversation, is data solutions. This is one of the hardest, and to be honest with you, very hard to create in a culture to do, because it relies upon a collaborative environment in which people aren't looking at maintaining their sandboxes, that aren't looking at self-preservation first, but rather a collaborative, what's the best way to do what we need to do. And the data solutions I'm talking about is scenario building, solution creation, interactive engagement of decisions, more in terms synoptically of being the prescriptive level of data solution. Prescriptive being, what do we do with this? And we're going to talk about AI in just a second, but the predictive brings you to the prescriptive. Predictive is seeing what needs to get done. Prescriptive is doing, facilitating what you've now been exposed to predictively. This is well ahead of reacting to stuff. Oh, that campaign died. Well, we got to plug in a new campaign. That lull before any arc going upwards, even if it is an upward arc, maybe it's another downward arc, you don't know. That lull cost you money. That diminishment of production to the point where it was acknowledged as a bad indicator of, oh, we lost ROI on this, or we lost revenue growth on it, we lost campaign expansion. Whatever the metric was. And by the time you rebound from that, which sadly agencies on their monthly report will tell you forensically, oh, that month, well, that campaign's bottomed out. What'd you all like to do about that? Well, for the 2 or 3 weeks that they bottomed out that they should have done something about, and they're just now talking about it, by the time they go through the process of creation, authorization, validation, approval, implementation, and then production, you've lost another 3 to 4 weeks of potential revenue because you went into this valley and you stayed in this valley. Meanwhile, your competitors, us, crushed it, took your business, and kept it afterwards. I digress. Data solutions, step 4. Prescriptive is 2 functions to this. Stress testing what you're doing before actually doing it to know what to expect should variations occur that you can predictively model. And I know that's a big mouthful, and I'll get to that. Creating the solutions from that by interactions of the departments so that you know when these things happen in a way that we understand them to happen, we already have in place, break seal, follow guidelines, what we should do about it to a starting point at least. So let's go back to the early scenarios of the testing before you need it, stress testing. And we've talked about this a few different ways. We did this in our budget conversations last year about stress testing your budget. The exclusion or diminishment of your contribution channels, marketing channels, your production channels like Google Ads or things like this, to see how you would readjust your marketing strategies to compensate on the other channels at what cost. Stress testing your budget. Nobody I know does that except for us. I take that back. I've heard of others, but I've never witnessed it. We do modeling classes. We do scenario classes with people. We try to teach them this process. And it's so hard to implement internally in an organization because nobody wants to see the cracks. They only want to see the veneer. And they don't want to consider the worst cases. They want to just consider the happinesses. It reminds me of that Super Bowl commercial with the monkeys and the one dude where they're all partying and burning money and smoking cigars and because the chart shows that the arrow's up and the guy comes in and shows them that they had it upside down and they told them to flip it back the other way because they don't want to deal with the truth. The prescriptive modeling data solutions of previous to needing them. We talked about a platform like Giru, which is a funnel-based program. We talked about actually last week and the week before. It's been my favorite toy these recent weeks, where we talked about modeling what you're doing and identifying where you have leaks or diminishment of value and what do you do about it. Same process goes with scenario building for prescriptive modeling. If you know that you have seasonal arcs with your ad campaigns, we have certain campaigns that run in winter. We have certain campaigns that run in spring. We have certain campaigns that run in summer, on and on and on. We know there's a beginning, a middle, and an end. We know that there's a growth, a peak, and a diminishment. Okay. For that reason, we know that we have a life cycle. That life cycle means that we have to begin the process of the next thing before the current thing begins to diminish. Now, sometimes there is no overlap based on the context of the marketing. You can't be talking in as much about fall offers in spring yet as much, although there's a but to that conversation as to knowing good targeting, knowing good messaging, knowing good content, that while you're still highly sought after for spring business, you can expose your fall interest to people that may not be considering you for fall simply because they've only thought of you in springtime. And this is a way of transitioning. We've had that discussion, transitioning your market segments from where they were first interested in you to ancillary interest, other aspects of you that they might be interested in. Best case in point, people go snowboarding in Aspen, skiing and so forth, Vail and all the rest of it. But there's also a whole flip of the coin for people that love going to those same locations during non-winter times, because it's not just subjective to only summer, in which they go bicycling down the hill or are hiking up the mountain or whatever it is that's not snow related. That ability to expose the contra or other variations of your product to people is a valuable process to this. So knowing those things, there's the arcs and the falls of what you're currently doing, and then there's the arcs of things that are going to go next. Sometimes they overlap, sometimes they don't. There's that gap point. Identifying those gap points goes into scenario building, seeing your ebbs and flows of business cycle and saying, wow, shoulder season, sounds familiar, right? For spring, while we had a short spring season this year, with Easter being at the end of March rather than deeper into April, that is usually the benchmark of people's vacation opportunities, days off opportunities, holiday days off opportunities, and so forth. So it has a very strong, powerful influence on spring type business for spring demand destinations. How do you help fill that expanded shoulder season for what would be now April? How do you fill this? Weather's still amicably the same as it was a week or two ago. The difference being that people don't have the ability, without it costing them more in the sense of vacation time. They don't have the fun additional holidays to stretch their vacation windows out, which is the drive of most holidays. How do you get them to think and consider? Well, going through that scenario of, well, most people are going to want to be possibly weekends at this point, which means that they're going to be able to have to travel by road more often than by flying, because flying requires a 21 day window, or at best 14 days out, so that they can get the most reasonable ticket price, what have you, so forth. So that's a very small market contribution to the demand that you're looking for shoulder. Your real growth would be drive market. Drive market would be, how far are people willing to go for the time that they plan on spending? On a regular weekend, if they would add a third, a third day to the weekend, a Monday or a Friday, or add 2 days to it, that means that they would possibly be leaving Thursday night, which means if they're leaving Thursday night to be here that evening versus getting here the next morning, how far distance does that make? Is it 150 miles? Is it 300 miles? These are the things that you go through in the scenario, and you create this program, which creates the targeting. And what do you do with the data, which is the key element of our discussion today? You look at the data. You look at your point of truth and say, well, how many people are within that radiant that we're talking about? How many people came here this same time last year? How many people came here after Easter last year? How many people do we know would be, what can we target to see if they would come during this shoulder season? And if so, when should we start talking to those people? When do they engage with us? This is data that we now have, okay? That we can look at engagements geographically, demographically, behaviorally, and that's the key element, behaviorally. And this is something I learned from one of my teammates, Aaron. I've always been about personas as to who we're talking to first, and then from there we stage our marketing based on talking to those people. He has pointed out to me, with the data that we have now available, it's actually an inversion. What action do we want to replicate? Well, we want to replicate the booking button. That's great. Brilliant. An easy one for that. But possibly means replicating the fact that they look at certain ad campaigns, that they replicate looking at certain pages on our website. If we have good, robust content that's reflective of all of the dimensions of our product at all seasons, what traffic on those pages, those people, that action of having looked at it means I want to make an audience with those people, so that I can then take that audience and expand it to people just like them that Google would be more aware of, that may not have ever come to my website, but are similar to the people that had. And so now I expand that model out. Then at that point, I begin to identify who those people represent persona-wise: family, couples, individual solo adventures, age categorizations, income categorizations, behavioral categorizations. All of those things come into play as to how I'm going to want to market to them, how I'm going to target them in a way of content relevance, and how I'm going to progressively communicate, not just show them the same ad every time I can, which is what everybody and their brother freaking does. Instead, I'm going to show them a progression of conversation of ads, a progression that says, you saw this one, so I'm going to show you this one now, because you're already familiar with what we said in the first one. So let's talk about the second one, where we get to give you more information. And then after that, the third one, depending upon where you're engaging them, on what platform and what medium: social, paid, display, OTT, radio. Just get the point? It's a mixture. We talked about target mixing. Anyways, that scenario building creates solution modeling. This is what we're going to do. This is when we're going to start it. How do we do this? Because we had KPIs that said, this is what we're trying to do. And we back into it saying, well, what data do we have to support our construct as to what we would do about it to get to that point? And from that, we look at creating analytic. We're looking at the data to review it. Well, in order to look at that data, we have to have some reports of combinations and correlations that came from the point of truth data, our 4 steps. So that prescriptive modeling, scenario creates solutions. Okay. Now, where do we going to talk about AI with all this? AI fits so well into the data analytics and data solutions, step 3 and step 4 of our program. The analytics is AI can use the data you're giving it, and you can make constructs that ask to look at the data the way you want it to be seen. And you get to ask it in a way that you point the AI via prompt, look at this data source. In this data source, this is the label I want you to look at, this column or this row series. Think of it as a chart like you see in your reports. And take that number and tell me that number compared to these numbers, or this number, if it's greater or lesser. If it's greater, I want you to take it and say, apply it to this number over here, and put the two together and say if there's a correlation or that this has an impact on this. That's the analytics function of the usage of AI. Data solutions, the predictive modeling of it would be, what should I do about it? So let's break that into a real world example. We talked about the fact that your ad campaign is performing and it has a pace and trend to it and everything's positive, green arrow up, numbers positive and so forth, but you begin to see a delta going down. So we ask AI, hey AI, Bob, I don't know. When this number, delta, this variance, gets to this number, that it gets this small, I want you to take the current production number for it, the current revenue or conversion number, both of those, okay, and compare it to all the other campaigns that are running, and tell me if the percentage it's contributing has also gone down or just its volume. So the other channels might be going down as well. Everything might be going down. Or is it just this channel and the other channels are still doing the same thing they're doing before? So that's the first question, is it going down compared to the others? If it is it better to move the money at the conversion that I'm getting at it over to the other channels based on their conversion? See, simple logic string. So scenario, channel 1, Google ad campaign 1, compared to all your other ad campaigns, begins to diminish in pace and trend. It goes down a certain number, so it gets the prompt's interest, saying it hit the threshold you told me to look for. First comparison, is it only going down or are the other ones going down? Second prompt. Third prompt is it better to transfer what we're spending on this one to other channels because they have better production? So now the prescriptive, which is the usage of the predictive model, which we just did, have AI telling you, hey, Lauren, your ad campaign 1 is now at a threshold you indicated. It is recommended that you take X percentage of the money that you have in it now and move it to campaign number 4, whose conversion numbers are larger, and the money would be better producing there. That's where you begin to build the AI. And it has to be that kind of, you have to look at every question. It's like a genie in the bottle mentality. You always ask for $1 million. Well, it's kind of weird to say, that sometimes the wish don't come out the way you expect it to because you didn't ask it in the right way. That modeling is critical in the sense of, that's where you will see a lot of the AI engagement over time. So I have browbeaten this process, but I think it's such an incredibly important way of looking at your marketing of objective versus not subjective. Subjective is, well, I kind of feel this time of year, we probably need to talk to some people that, couldn't make it during spring break, and they might be still interested in us, especially if we offer a low enough rate. Who, where, and why? What? Well, how much of a lower rate? Who are these people? Where are they at? And how fast are we doing it compared to when we need them? Mm-hmm. Those questions in subjective marketing don't get answered easily. They get, hey, back off, Lauren. I'm just coming up with the idea here. We should have been doing this a month ago. No duh, right? Objective is, hey, look, we know we have a trend line that our pace of demand goes off 25% the day after Easter. To fill that 25% diminishment, let's look at what markets would be interested in post-Easter, define the metrics and the methodology and the targeting, everything else, model it to know whether or not that there's a value relationship of doing this and how much it might cost us at current cost of click-through cost and conversion values of each of the channels that are contributing versus the rates that we're asking for. We model that to a revenue goal to say that this would have an impact of such and such. Great. When do we need to implement it? At what audiences? For what duration prior to it? So that instead of that dip, waiting for it to come back up, the dip just skips and it goes to the next arc. That is objective marketing. So again, the 4 steps for data progression, for adaptive KPIs, for objective marketing is data identification, aka point of truth, data reporting, aka descriptive data, data analytics is number 3, aka predictive data, and step number 4 is data solutions, aka prescriptive data. So with that, I think we've hit my points that I wanted to make. Thank you so much for following me on this process. But probably spoke a little too quickly. The transcripts and the translations will be available. Our simulcast of this show will go back out 11:30 a.m. this Wednesday for Sydney, Australian time for our APAC friends, 11:30 a.m. London, UK time for our European and Mideast friends that are following. For everyone that watched us live, thank you so much, as always, for following the dialogue with that. We will have a recap of this on our podcast today, along with some modeling tools. Again, I'm going to not focus so much on Giru because I have been really referring to it a lot these past few weeks. But I will talk about other modelings that are going on, other ways in which AI is functioning. There are so many good singles or specific use tools for AI. And we're going to talk about a couple of them today on the podcast. So we look forward to that on our podcast show, 39 platforms, Apple, iTunes, and all the rest of them, Spotify, on and on and on. And then, of course, on the radio station, we'll have the podcast broadcast during our marketing hour coming up this week. So with that, my name is Lauren Gray. Thank you for the privilege of your time, and I look forward to talking to you all next week.